Before we begin, I ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you these untold stories of the famous. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned warehouse in Hong Kong, its rays cutting through the industrial haze that perpetually hung over this part of the city. I stood at the edge of a 40-foot shipping container, the metal warm beneath my bare feet, feeling the familiar cocktail of adrenaline and fear coursing through my veins. Below me, the concrete floor seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by carefully positioned cardboard boxes and foam padding that suddenly looked pathetically inadequate. Jean-Claude, I've seen Jackie Chan break his skull for less money than you're making today, came the voice of Marcus Chun, our stunt coordinator, his weathered face creased with genuine concern. This ISN tab out, proving anything to anyone, is it? But it was. Every breath I took on that container was about proving something. I flexed my legs, feeling the familiar burn in my quadriceps, the same muscles that had carried me through countless tournaments, through hours of training that had sculpted me into the weapon I'd become. Marcus, my friend, I called down, my Belgian accent thick with emotion. This is everything. The year was 1995, and I was supposed to be at the peak of my powers. Time Cop had been a surprise hit just the year before, grossing over 100 million worldwide and proving that Jean-Claude Van Damme could open a movie. But Hollywood was a carnivorous beast that devoured its own children. Already, I could feel the industry shifting beneath my feet like unstable ground. The muscles from Brussels, that's what they called me, but lately it felt more like a prison sentence than a badge of honor. Every conversation seemed to revolve around my physicality, my accent, my ability to kick high and split wide. Nobody talked about my acting, about the years I'd spent studying theater in Belgium, about the artistic dreams that had driven me to America in the first place. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to those early days in Brussels, to the small apartment above me, Father's flower shop, where I'd practice my kicks in front of a cracked mirror, dreaming of Hollywood stardom. My father, Eugene van Varenberg, had been a pragmatic man who sold flowers for a living but had poetry in his soul. He'd watch me train with a mixture of pride and concern that I can still see clearly in my mind's eye. Jean-Claude, he'd say in French, his calloused hands arranging carnations with surprising delicacy. The body is strong, but the heart must be stronger. Remember this when you're famous, when everyone wants a piece of you. I'd laugh thin, young and invincible, convinced that fame would solve all my problems. How naive it'd been. Fame, I discovered, was like a drug that required increasingly dangerous doses to maintain its effects. And here I was preparing to attempt the most dangerous stunt of my career, not because the script demanded it, not because it would enhance the story, but because I needed to prove to the industry, to the world, and most importantly to myself, that I was still relevant. The stunt was deceptively simple in concept. I would perform a split between two moving trucks, 40 feet above the ground, with nothing but my own strength and flexibility keeping me from plummeting to the concrete below. The trucks would start close together, then slowly drive apart until I was stretched to my absolute limit, creating a visual that would be both spectacular and terrifying. Tom Cruise hangs from planes. Jackie breaks bones for art. But this? The insurance investigator had told the producers just days earlier, his nasal voice dripping with skepticism. This is just showing off. But he didn't understand. This wasn't showing off. This was resurrection. Each film demanded a higher cliff to leap from, and I was running out of cliffs. I opened my eyes and looked down at the crew assembled below. There was Marcus, of course, his weathered face creased with worry lines that seemed to deepen every time he looked up at me. Beside him stood Jimmy Nickerson, the director, a young American who'd made his name doing music videos and was convinced that destroying actors was the same as making art. This is going to resurrect your career, Jean-Claude. Jimmy had told me that morning over breakfast, eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. When the studios see this footage, they'll be throwing money at you again. But as I stood on that container, feeling the Hong Kong wind whip across my skin, I wondered if resurrection and destruction might be the same thing. The trucks below rumbled to life, their diesel engines creating a mechanical symphony that vibrated through the metal beneath my feet. The drivers, two local men whose names I'd never learned, sat behind their wheels with expressions of grim determination. "Ready positions, everyone." Jimmy's voice crackled through the radio system. "Jean-Claude, whenever you're ready, my friend." I raised my hand, the signal that had become as familiar to me as breathing. Around the warehouse, cameras began rolling, capturing what would either be my triumphant return to relevance or my final performance. The irony wasn't lost on me that both possibilities might amount to the same thing. As I prepared to lower myself between the trucks, my mind flashed to a conversation I'd had with Sylvester Stallone just months earlier at a Hollywood party. We'd been standing on a balcony overlooking the city, two aging gladiators discussing the brutal mathematics of fame. "The thing about being the tough guy," Slide said, nursing a drink and staring out at the lights below, "is that the crowd always wants more blood. First you fight, then you bleed, then you die, and if you're really unlucky, you do it all in the right order." His words echoed in my head as I placed my hands on the edge of the container and began to lower myself down. The trucks were positioned perfectly, their beds exactly the right distance apart for my legs to reach. But trucks weren't stationary platforms. They swayed slightly with their idling engines, creating a subtle but crucial instability that I would have to compensate for with every muscle in my body. The first touch of my feet against the truck beds sent a jolt of awareness through my nervous system. The metal was warm from the morning sun, but vibrated constantly with the rumble of the engines below. I could feel every mechanical heartbeat through the soles of my feet, a reminder that I was balancing not on solid ground, but on two separate vehicles operated by men I didn't know and didn't necessarily trust. "Beautiful, Jean-Claude. Absolutely beautiful." Jimmy's voice reached me through the radio, clipped to Marcus's belt. "Now remember, once you're in position, we're going to have the trucks slowly move apart. Just hold that split for 30 seconds, and we'll have our money shot." 30 seconds. The time it took to brush your teeth, to tie your shoes, to decide what to have for breakfast. But 30 seconds suspended 40 feet in the air, depending entirely on my flexibility and strength to keep from falling, might as well have been 30 lifetimes. I settled into the split position, feeling my hamstrings and hip flexors stretch to their limits. This was familiar territory. I'd been doing splits since childhood, had built my entire career on this very flexibility, but familiarity was a liar. It whispered safety when there was only danger. The trucks began to move. Slowly at first, just inches apart, the distance between the beds increasing with mechanical precision. I felt me legs stretch wider, the familiar burn of muscles being pushed to their limits. This was still within my comfort zone, still within the realm of what I'd done thousands of times before in gyms and dojos around the world. But as the trucks continued their inexorable journey apart, I began to realize that this was different from anything I'd attempted before. In a controlled environment, I could adjust my position, shift my weight, even abort the split if something went wrong. Here, 40 feet above unforgiving concrete, there was no escape hatch, no second chances. No room for the luxury of fear. "Talk to me, Jean-Claude." Marcus's voice carried up to me, and I could hear something in his tone that I'd never heard before. Not doubt, but terror. Like dancing with death. I called back, though the truth was simpler and more terrifying. It felt like dying. The distance between the trucks had reached what I estimated to be about 7 feet. Well, within my normal range, but approaching the point where the split would become genuinely challenging. I could feel the strain in my inner thighs, the deep burn that signaled my muscles were being pushed toward their breaking point. That's when I noticed the first irregularity in the truck on my right. A slight hesitation in its movement, otany stutter that sent a ripple of instability up through my leg. I compensated automatically, shifting my weight slightly to my left, but the movement created a chain reaction that I hadn't anticipated. The truck on my left, perhaps responding to some signal I couldn't see or hear, suddenly lurched forward several inches. The unexpected movement caught me completely off guard, forcing my right leg toe stretch beyond what I prepared for. Pain shot through my hip flexor like an electric shock, and for a terrifying moment, I felt my grip on control begin to slip. Stop! Stop the trucks! I heard Marcus shouting below, his voice cutting through the mechanical rumble with urgent authority. But either the drivers didn't hear him over the noise of their engines, or the communication system had failed, because the trucks continued their relentless journey apart. The distance between them had now reached nearly 8 feet, still technically within my range, but at the very edge of what was safe. I closed my eyes and tried to find the calm center that had carried me through countless tournaments, through years of training that had forged my body into something approaching perfection. But perfection had limits, and those limits were measured in inches, in degrees, in the space between two trucks that wanted nothing more than to pull me apart. When I opened my eyes again, I could see the panic beginning to spread across every face below me. Marcus was gesturing frantically at the truck drivers. Jimmy was screaming into his radio, and even the camera operators seemed to have forgotten their equipment in favor of watching a man discover his mortality in real time. The understanding hit me like a physical blow. I was no longer the director of this performance. The trucks, the distance between them, my own body's ability to maintain this position, all of it had passed beyond my control. I was a passenger on a journey I'd initiated, but could no longer steer. The trucks continued to move apart, toward a distance no human body was ever meant to endure. 9 feet between the trucks. That's when my body sent its first real distress signal. Not the familiar burn-off stretched muscles, but something deeper. A grinding in my hip joints that felt like bone scraping bone. The truck beds vibrated beneath my feet with each engine pulse, creating micro-tremors that forced me to constantly fight for balance. Stop! Stop the fucking trucks! Marcus's voice cut through the mechanical rumble, raw and desperate. I could see him sprinting between the vehicles, his weathered face twisted with panic as Hetried to flag down the drivers. Don't stop. Keep rolling. Jimmy's voice crackled through the radio, electric with excitement. This is the shot that's going to make me bigger than Cameron. Jean-Claude, you're making history up there. 10 feet. My quadriceps began to tremble, muscle fibers firing in rapid bursts as they fought to maintain a position no human spine was designed for. Sweat poured into my eyes, turning the world below into a blur of concrete and shouting faces. Suddenly I was back in that Beverly Hills office 18 months earlier. The smell of leather and broken dreams. David Geffen's assistant sliding a script across mahogany, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Mr. Van Damme, we're very excited about this project. Very dialogue-heavy. Very American. I had read the first page, hope crumbling with each line. The character wasn't European. He was corn-fed American hero with a football background. But I thought the meeting was about me playing the lead. Her laugh cut like breaking crystal. Oh no, sweetie. We want you for the villain. The foreign terrorist. Lots off-sneering, lots of incomprehensible threats. Very ethnic, 20 years of training. A lifetime of dedication. And to them, I was just ethnic. This is who you are now, Jean-Claude, she had said as I stood to leave. The sooner you accept it, the easier this will be for everyone. The memory shattered as the trucks reached 11 feet apart. Something deep in my pelvis gave a warning. Not a tear, but a rope beginning to fray. My breathing turned ragged, each breath sending pain radiating through my core. Marcus had reached one of the drivers, pounding on the cab window, his face purple with rage. Jean-Claude, I won't let them kill you for this shot, he screamed up at me. But the truck kept moving, following whatever programming Jimmy had locked into this nightmare. Talk to me. Are you okay up there? Marcus's voice cracked. Okay. The word came from another world where humans weren't suspended 40 feet in the air between machines designed to pull them apart. I tried to respond, but only managed to sound half gasp, half growl, the noise wounded animals make when they realize the trap is closing. Jimmy circled below with his handheld camera, his entire body vibrating with predatory hunger. The agony in his face is perfect. This is going to be legendary. At 11.5 feet, my body crossed into territory beyond human design. I existed now in the space between anatomy and catastrophe, held together by stubborn will and rapidly failing tissue. The right truck hit a patch of oil, just a tiny slip that sent tremors through the vehicle's frame. But that micro-movement forced my leg another crucial inch. Lightning, made of broken glass, shot through my hip joint. I screamed, not the controlled sound of martial arts, but the raw shriek of flesh pushed past breaking. The sound bounced off concrete walls, creating an echo that silenced even Jimmy's excited chatter. Get him down now. Marcus was climbing onto the left truck, his hands scrambling for purchase on the metal sides. But even if he could reach me, what then? Pull me down and watch me fall 40 feet, 12 feet. I could visualize the anatomy textbooks, the maximum safe range for human flexibility. I was operating now in a zone medical science would classify as structural failure imminent. My hip flexors felt like guitar strings tuned beyond their breaking point. Below, the warehouse had split into warring camps. Marcus and the older crew frantically trying to stop the trucks, while Jimmy and his cameras circled like predators tasting blood. This is what real filmmaking looks like. Jimmy screamed, his voice cracking. But they weren't filming Amo-Vi anymore. They were filming my death. My vision began tunneling, darkness creeping from the edges as my brain redirected blood from non-essential functions. My hands, gripping the truck edges for stability, went numb. But I couldn't let go. Letting go meant falling, and falling meant the end of everything. The right truck hit another concrete imperfection, a slight rise that jolted the vehicle. This time, the sensation wasn't just pain. Something fundamental was giving way, like a load-bearing wall finally surrendering. And then I felt it, the sickening rip deep in my left hip. Not a strain or complaint, but actual tissue tearing. The sound was audible, a wet pop that echoed through my body like a gunshot. The moment I knew this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about how much I was willing to sacrifice remain a legend. The wet pop of tearing tissue was followed by something worse, silence. Not the warehouse silence of 100 people holding their breath, but the internal silence of a body that had stopped communicating with its owner. My left leg simply wasn't there anymore. Not gone, but disconnected like a phone line that had been cut. The hip joint that had carried me through thousands of kicks, countless splits, 20 years of impossible feats, had finally surrendered. I looked down at my leg, still stretched between the trucks, and felt a strange disconnect. It looked like me leg, same muscle definition, same scars from old training injuries, but it belonged to someone else now. Someone whose body still worked the way bodies were supposed to work. The trucks were at 13 feet apart and still moving. Jesus Christ, stop the trucks. Marcus's voice cut through the mechanical rumble, high and desperate. He had climbed halfway up the side of the left truck, his weathered hands slipping on metal ash fought for purchase. Cut the fucking engines. But Jimmy was somewhere below, still filming, his voice crackling through the radio with manic excitement. Keep rolling. We're making history. This is the shot that's going to change everything. History. I almost laughed, which should have been impossible given that I was hanging 40 feet above concrete with a destroyed hip. But there was something darkly funny about it. He was right. We were making history. The history of the moment Jean-Claude Van Damme's body finally admitted what Hollywood had been saying for years, that he was past his expiration date. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the sharp agony of a broken bone or the burn-off overworked muscle, but something deeper and more fundamental. It felt like my skeleton was coming apart from the inside, joints separating and bones shifting in ways that violated the basic engineering of the human frame. 12.5 feet. Wait, were the trucks coming back together? For a moment, hope flared in Micah's like a match struck in darkness. But no, it was just my vision playing tricks. The combination of pain and shock was making the world swim in and out of focus. The trucks were still moving apart, and I was still hanging between them like a wishbone about to snap. Jean-Claude, talk to me. Marcus had made it to the truck bed and was trying to pull himself up, his face purple with exertion. How bad is it? How bad? I tried to form words, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. How do you explain, to Simeone, that you can feel your career dying along with your body? That every second hanging here was another nail in the coffin of everything you built? I can't. I managed to croak, the words barely audible over the engine noise. I can't feel my leg. The admission hung in the air like a confession. In 20 years of professional fighting, training, and stunts, I had never admitted physical weakness. Pain was temporary. Injuries were obstacles to overcome. The body was a machine that responded to will and determination. But machines break. And when they break at the worst possible moment, in front of cameras and crews and directors who see you as nothing more than an aging piece of equipment, the breaking becomes something more than physical. Hold on. I'm coming up. Marcus was fully on the truck bed now, crawling toward me with desperate determination. But what could he do? Even if he reached me, even if he somehow managed to support me weight, we were still 40 feet up with nowhere to go. Below us, the warehouse had erupted into chaos. I could hear shouting, running footsteps, the screech off metal as someone tried to physically stop the trucks. But it all seemed distant now, like watching a movie with the sound turned down. The only reality was the spreading numbness in my leg and the growing realization that this wasn't going to end well. 14 feet. The number floated through my mind like a death sentence. No human being was designed to stretch this far. The anatomy textbooks I'd studied during my early training days had been very clear about the limits of flexibility. I was now operating in a zone that medical science would classify as catastrophic structural failure. My right hand, gripping the edge of the truck bed for stability, began to slip. The metal was slick with sweat, not just mine, but the nervous perspiration of everyone in that warehouse who was watching Amon's body destroy itself in real time. I tried to adjust my grip, but moving my upper body sent fresh waves of agony through my demolished hip. I've got you. Marcus was close now, maybe 6 feet away, his weathered face etched with determination and terror. Don't let go. Don't let go. The phrase would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Letting go wasn't a choice anymore. It was an inevitability. My body was making that decision for me. Finger by finger, muscle by muscle, as systems shut down and strength bled away into the concrete 40 feet below. I closed my eyes and tried to find some center of calm, some place inside myself where the pain couldn't reach. This was a technique I'd learned in my earliest martial arts training, the ability to separate mind from body, to exist in a space beyond physical sensation. But this pain was different. It wasn't just in my body, it was in my soul. For 20 years, I had been Jean-Claude Van Damme, not just an actor or a martial artist, but a living symbol of what the human body could achieve when pushed to its absolute limits. I was the guy who could do a split between 2 trucks, who could kick a man in the head while doing a backflip, who could make the impossible look effortless. But hanging there between those trucks, feeling my hip joint come apart like a badly assembled toy, I understood something that shattered every assumption I'd built my life on. I wasn't Jean-Claude Van Damme anymore. I was just Jean-Claude Van Varenberg, a 44-year-old man from Brussels whose body had finally admitted what his critics had always claimed, that beneath all the kicks and splits and impossible stunts, he was just flesh and blood and bone, and all of those things had limits. Jean-Claude, look at me. Marcus's voice cut through my spiral of self-destruction. He was close enough now that I could see the fear in his eyes, the way his hands were shaking as he reached toward me. You're going to be okay. We're going to get you down. But I could see in his face that he didn't believe it any more than I did. This wasn't a situation that had a good ending. Either I would fall 40 feet to concrete, or my hip would tear completely apart trying to hold a position that was biomechanically impossible, or both. The truck on my right hit another imperfection in the floor, just a tiny bump, but enough to send vibrations up through the vehicle and into my already destroyed leg. The sensation was like electricity, but electricity made of broken glass and regret. I screamed again, but this time the sound was different. Not the raw cry of pain from before, but something deeper and more primal. The sound of a man realizing that everything he'd built his identity was crumbling in real time. Cut. "Cut the fucking cameras," someone was shouting below. Maybe Marcus had radioed down, or maybe someone in the crew had finally developed a conscience. But Jimmy's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "No, keep rolling. This is the shot that's going to win us awards. Keep rolling." Awards. The word bounced around in my skull like a pinball. What kind of award do you win for filming Amon's destruction? What category is there for capturing the exact moment when a legend becomes a cautionary tale? 15 feet. The trucks were still moving, still following whatever diabolical programming Jimmy had locked into this nightmare. My left leg was completely numb now, a dead weight that was held in place only by ligaments and tendons that were stretched beyond any reasonable limit. I could feel my right hand starting to slip again. The metal edge of the truck bed was cutting into my palm, but I barely felt it. All sensation had been overwhelmed by the cosmic wrongness of my hip joint, which felt like it was being slowly pulled apart by cosmic forces. Almost there. Marcus was maybe 3 feet away now, close enough that I could smell his fierce sweat, could see the way his pupils were dilated with adrenaline. But 3 feet might as well have been 3 meals. The truck beds were moving apart too fast, and he was running out of space to crawl. Below us, I could hear the screech of brakes as someone finally managed to get through to one of the drivers. But the left truck, Marcus's truck, wasn't stopping. If anything, it seemed to be accelerating, carrying him away from me just as I needed him most. "Jump back." I tried to yell, but my voice came out as a wheeze. "It's not stopping." Marcus looked back toward the cab of his truck, then forward at me, and I could see the calculation in Heise's. The terrible mathematics of heroism. How much of himself was he willing to risk to save someone who might already be beyond saving? "I'm not leaving you," he shouted and lunged forward just as the trucks reached 16 feet apart. For a moment, suspended there in space and time, I thought he might actually reach me. His weathered hand stretched toward mine, fingers splayed wide, face set with the kind of determination that moves mountains and stops bullets. But 16 feet was too far. Even for Marcus, even for a man who'd spent 30 years making impossible things look easy, 16 feet was simply beyond the reach of human capability. His fingers brushed mine for just an instant, a touch so brief it might have been imagination, and then the trucks carried us apart again, leaving me more alone than I'd ever been in my life. My grip slipped. For the first time, I felt the air rush beneath me, whispering the promise of the fall. The fall began slowly, almost gracefully. My right hand lost its grip first, fingers peeling away from the truck bed one by one, like flower petals in a strong wind. For a heartbeat that lasted forever, I hung suspended by my left hand alone, my destroyed hip screaming in protest as my full body weight shifted to that single point of contact. Time moved like honey. I could see everything with crystal clarity. Marcus diving forward on his truck bed, his weathered face twisted with desperate determination. Jimmy below, his camera still rolling, mouth open in what might have been horror or ecstasy. The concrete floor 40 feet down, scattered with those pathetic cardboard boxes that suddenly looked like postage stamps. Then my left hand gave way. The sensation of falling was nothing like I'd imagined. Movies made it look dramatic, arms windmilling, screaming all the way down. But reality was different. Reality was a strange silence, a disconnection from everything that had seemed important just seconds before. The trucks, the cameras, the crew, Jimmy's obsessive need to capture history. All of it became irrelevant in the face of simple physics. Gravity doesn't care if you're Jean-Claude Van Damme or Jean-Claude Van Varenberg or just another body following Newton's laws toward an inevitable collision with the ground. I fell backward, my damaged hip twisting at an angle that sent fresh lightning through my nervous system. The warehouse spun around me. Concrete walls, steel beams, shocked faces all blurring into a kaleidoscope of impending disaster. My peripheral vision caught Marcus launching himself from his truck bed, his body arcing through space in a trajectory that would either save us both or kill us together. In that moment of weightless terror, my father's voice came back to me with perfect clarity. Not from the flower shop or my childhood, but from the last conversation we'd had before his death. I was visiting Brussels at the height of my fame, showing off photos from movie sets and talking about my next big project. Jean-Claude, he had said in French, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged white roses in a crystal vase. Do you remember why you started fighting? To be the best. I had answered automatically, the same response I'd given in 100 interviews. But he had shaken his head, disappointed. No, mon fils. You started fighting because you were afraid. Afraid of being weak, afraid of being forgotten, afraid of being ordinary. The fighting was never about being the best. It was about proving you were enough. I am enough. I had protested, but even then, the words felt hollow. Then why? He had asked, his eyes sad but loving. Are you still so afraid? The memory shattered as Marcus's body collided with mine 3 stories above the concrete floor. His arms wrapped around my chest like a vice, his momentum carrying us both toward the far wall of the warehouse. But instead of the clean rescue I'd seen in movies, this was chaos. Our combined weight was too much. The angle was wrong. Marcus's grip on me was solid, but there was nothing to stop our fall, just 2 bodies plummeting toward destruction instead of one. I've got you, he screamed into my ear, but I could feel his arms shaking with the strain. We were falling faster now, the warehouse floor rushing up to meet us with implacable certainty. That's when the foam padding proved to be more than decorative. We hit the largest stack of boxes in an explosion of cardboard and industrial foam, the impact driving every molecule of air from my lungs and sending fresh agony through my already demolished hip. The sound was tremendous, not just the crash of our bodies, but the symphony of a film set in chaos. Cameras dropping, crew members shouting, metal equipment clattering as people ran for cover. But we were alive. Marcus rolled off me, gasping, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead where he'd caught a corner off the concrete floor. Jean-Claude? Jean-Claude, talk to me. I tried to speak, but my lungs felt like collapsed balloons. The world swam in and out of focus, reality fracturing into disconnected images, warehouse lights spinning overhead, concerned faces leaning over me, Jimmy somewhere in the distance still shouting about getting the cameras back up. Did we get it? Tell me we got the shot. His voice cut through the chaos like a rusty knife. Someone tell me the cameras were rolling when they fell. Marcus's response was unprintable, delivered with the kind of venom that 30 years in the stunt business had taught him to reserve for directors who confuse human beings with expendable props. I tried to move my left leg and immediately understood that my relationship with my own body had fundamentally changed. The hip joint that had carried me through countless tournaments and film sets was no longer connected in any meaningful way to the rest of my skeletal system. I could feel the bones grinding against each other, cartilage and ligaments that had been shredded by forces they were never designed to withstand. Don't move, Marcus said, his hands gentle but firm on my shoulders. The paramedics are coming. Just don't move. Paramedics. The word brought a fresh wave of reality crashing over me. This wasn't a movie where heroes walk away from impossible crashes with nothing more than photogenic scratches. This was the real world, where bodies break and careers end and legends discover they're made of the same fragile flesh as everyone else. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. The Hong Kong emergency services, racing to the scene of what the newspapers would probably call a stunt gone wrong, or a movie set accident. But it wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable conclusion of a life spent pushing human limitations beyond their breaking point. Around me, the warehouse had erupted into controlled chaos. Crew members were clearing equipment, creating space for the emergency responders. I could hear Jimmy arguing with someone, probably the insurance investigators who would descend on this scene like vultures on roadkill. This is natural evolution of cinema, he was shouting. Audiences demand authenticity. They want to see real pain, real risk. Real pain. I almost laughed, which sent a fresh spike of agony through my chest. Jimmy wanted to capture real pain? Well, congratulations. He'd managed to film the exact moment when Jean-Claude Van Damme's body had declared war on Jean-Claude Van Damme's ego. And his ego had lost. The pain was unlike anything I'd experienced in 20 years of professional violence. Not the clean paint-off and knockout punch, or the satisfying burn of muscles pushed to their limits, but something deeper and more fundamental. This was the pain of systems failing, of a machine that had been pushed beyond its operational parameters and was now shutting down piece by piece. Jean-Claude, stay with me. Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. Keep your eyes open. Talk to me. I can't. I wheezed, each word a monumental effort. I can't feel my leg. The admission hung in the air between us like a death sentence. In 20 years of professional fighting and stunts, I had never admitted physical weakness. Pain was temporary. Injuries were obstacles to overcome. The body was a weapon to be wielded, not a limitation to be acknowledged. But lying there on that warehouse floor, surrounded by scattered foam and broken dreams, I finally understood what my father had been trying to tell me all those years ago. The fighting had never been about proving I was the best. It had been about proving I was enough. And maybe, just maybe, enough didn't require destroying myself to achieve it. The sirens were closer now, their wailing cutting through the warehouse noise like a countdown to the end of everything I'd built my identity on. In a few minutes, paramedics would load me onto a stretcher and carry me away from this place. The cameras would stop rolling. The crew would go home. And somewhere in the editing room, Jimmy would cobble together footage of the moment Jean-Claude Van Damme's career died on a Hong Kong warehouse floor. My vision was starting to blur around the edges, consciousness flickering like a candle in a strong wind. But in those last moments of clarity, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the peace of victory or success or proving the critics wrong, but the simple peace of a man who had finally stopped running from himself. The world went black, and in that blackness, I finally understood. I was no longer proving anything. I was just trying to stay alive. I woke up 3 days later in a Hong Kong hospital that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. The ceiling was white, institutional, nothing like the warehouse where my career had gone to die. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. Then itched to move my left leg. The scream that came out of me was barely human. Easy, easy. A voice with a British accent, calm and professional. Dr. Sarah Chun. I would learn her name later, along with the names of the 3 surgeons who had spent 8 hours trying to reconstruct what was left of my hip joint. You've been through quite an ordeal, Mr. Van Damme. Ordeal. Such a polite word for what had happened in that warehouse. I tried to sit up, but my body had other ideas. Everything below my waist felt disconnected, like electrical wiring that had been torn loose and hastily spliced back together. How bad? I croaked, my throat raw from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. Dr. Chun pulled up a chair, the way doctors do when they're about to deliver news that will change your life forever. The hip joint was completely dislocated. We've managed to repair most of the damage, but she paused, choosing her words carefully. Your days of extreme physical activity are over. No more martial arts. No more stunts. You'll walk again, but you'll never be what you were. Never be what you were. The words hit me harder than the fall had. Jean-Claude Van Damme without stunts was like a gun without bullets. Technically still the same object, but stripped of everything that made it dangerous. The next weeks passed in a haze of morphine and physical therapy, punctuated by visits from insurance investigators who spoke in hushed tones about liability and career-ending injuries. Marcus came by every day, his own forehead still stitched from our crash, bringing magazines and stories from the outside world that I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Jimmy's shopping the footage. He told me one afternoon, his voice tight with disgust, calling it the most dangerous stunt ever filmed. Says it's going to revolutionize action cinema. I closed my eyes, imagining my destruction being packaged and sold like any other product. Somewhere in editing rooms across the world, technicians were cutting together the moment my body betrayed me, adding dramatic music and slow-motion effects to make my agony more marketable. The industry's talking. Marcus continued, his weathered face grim. Some saying you've lost it. Others saying you never had it. Stallone called yesterday, but he trailed off. But what? He hung up when I told him about your hip. I think he was scared, Jean-Claude. Scared of what your accident means for all of us who make money pretending to be indestructible. The calls that didn't come spoke louder than the ones that did. No visits from studio executives promising comeback roles. No flowers from co-stars who'd once competed for scenes with me. Hollywood had a short memory for heroes and an even shorter one for has-beens who'd made the mistake of proving they were mortal. The physical therapy was humbling in ways that went far beyond the obvious. Learning to walk again after 4, supported by parallel bars and the patient encouragement of a 20-something therapist who'd probably never heard of blood sport, was its own form of purgatory. Each step was a negotiation between what my mind remembered my body could do and what my body was actually capable of. Small goals, Lisa, my therapist, would say. Today we walk to the window. Tomorrow we try the hallway. Small goals. My entire career had been built on achieving the impossible, and now I was celebrating making it across a room without falling down. 3 months after the accident, I was finally cleared to fly back to Los Angeles. The studio had quietly canceled my next 2 projects, citing health concerns and insurance complications. My agent, Sarah Finn, met me at LAX with the kind of strained smile that Hollywood professionals reserve for clients whose value has just cratered. "We'll get through this," she said, helping me into the wheelchair that would be my companion for the next several months. It's a setback, not an ending. But driving through the streets of Los Angeles, past billboards advertising the latest action spectacles starring younger, more intact bodies, I knew she was lying to both of us. This wasn't a setback. It was an ending. The question was what would begin in its place. I spent the next year learning to live in a world where I couldn't kick above my waist or do a split without surgical intervention. The hip replacement surgery had been successful from a medical standpoint. I could walk, I could climb stairs, I could even manage a light jog on good days. But the explosive physicality that had defined my existence was gone forever, amputated as surely as if they'd removed the limb entirely. The scripts that came my way reflected my new reality. Villains in wheelchairs, aging mentors who dispensed wisdom from the sidelines, comic relief roles that traded on the irony of the once mighty action star reduced to pratfalls. Each offer was a reminder of what I'd lost, wrapped in the hollow promise of what I might still become. It was during one of these dark months that I found myself back in Brussels, standing in front of my father's flower shop. The new owner had kept the name, Van Varenberg Florist, but everything else had changed. Where my father's careful arrangements had once filled the windows, now there were gaudy displays that looked like they'd been assembled by machine. I pushed open the door, the familiar bell chiming overhead, and breathed in the scent of roses and regret. The young woman behind the counter looked up from her cash register, recognizing me with the polite confusion of someone who knew they should know who I was, but couldn't quite place me. "Can I help you?" she asked in French. "I used to live here," I said, gesturing vaguely at the space that had once been our home. "My father owned this shop." Her face brightened with recognition, not of me, but of the name. "Eugene Van Varenberg. My grandmother told me about him. She said he could make flowers speak to people, make them say things that words scalded." I nodded, remembering my father's hands as they arranged carnations and roses, the gentle precision that had seemed so different from the violence I'd chosen to pursue. "What did she tell you about his son?" The young woman looked confused. "His son?" I thought. I heard he had a son who went to America, but she shrugged apologetically. "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to him." Standing there in that flower shop, surrounded by the scent of my childhood and the weight of my choices, I realized something profound. Jean-Claude Van Damme had become so large that he'd completely eclipsed Jean-Claude Van Varenberg. But now, with the legend broken and the myth deflated, maybe there was room for the man to emerge. I never did make the comeback that Hollywood loves to write about. There were no triumphant returns to action cinema, no inspiring montages of overcoming impossible odds. Instead, I learned smaller lessons about smaller victories. I learned that there was dignity in teaching martial arts to children who would never be professional fighters. I learned that there was satisfaction in small film roles that required acting rather than athleticism. I learned that my father had been right. I had been enough all along. Years later, I found myself in my bathroom at home in Los Angeles, studying my reflection in the mirror. The scar from my hip surgery ran down my left thigh like a lightning bolt, a permanent reminder of the day I tried to prove my immortality and instead discovered my humanity. My hair was grayer now, my face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from learning hard lessons the hard way. I raised my right leg slowly, testing the limits of my flexibility. I could still manage a respectable side kick, though nothing like the head-high explosions of my prime. My left leg followed more reluctantly, the reconstructed hip joint protesting with a dull ache that had become my constant companion. It wasn't the body of Jean-Claude Van Damme, the action star who could split between moving trucks or kick through concrete blocks. But it was the body of Jean-Claude Van Varenberg, a man who had finally learned the difference between being legendary and being alive. I lowered my legs and met my own eyes in the mirror. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove I was a legend. I was finally learning how to be a man. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.